In the winter of 1943, the American daylight bombing campaign over Germany was dying. Bomber crews were being cut to pieces on missions so bloody that, statistically, a man was unlikely to survive his tour. The problem was simple and seemingly unsolvable. No fighter in the world could escort the bombers all the way to targets deep inside Germany and back. And then, almost by accident, the answer arrived. It was a fighter the United States Army Air Forces had barely wanted. Born from a British shopping trip and rescued by a British engine. Within a year, its pilots were circling over Berlin itself, and the commander of the German fighter force would say that when he saw those fighters over the capital, he knew the air war was lost. This is the story of the North American P-51 Mustang, the fighter remembered as the plane that won the sky over Europe. That reputation is enormous. Some of it is completely deserved, some of it is legend that has grown well past the record. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which is which. The Mustang exists because of the British, and it is worth being honest about how strange its birth really was. In early 1940, with the war going badly, a British purchasing commission came to the United States looking to buy fighters. They approached North American Aviation, a company that had never built a frontline fighter, and asked it to produce an existing American design under license. North American's leadership made an audacious counteroffer. "Give us a few months," they said, "and we will design you something better from a clean sheet of paper." The British agreed, and the prototype rolled out in roughly 100 days, an astonishing pace even by wartime standards. The airframe that emerged was genuinely advanced. It had an unusually clean, carefully streamlined shape, a radiator arrangement tucked under the fuselage that produced remarkably little drag, and a wing designed around new thinking about smooth airflow that helped the aircraft slip through the air more efficiently than its rivals. The result was a fighter that flew faster than others on the same power, and, crucially, one that sipped fuel gently in cruise. But the first Mustangs had a fatal weakness. Their American Allison engine performed well down low and ran out of breath at altitude, exactly where the air war over Europe was being fought. So the early Mustang was shunted into low-level reconnaissance and ground attack. Useful work, but a supporting role. The aircraft that would become a legend was, in its first year, and also ran. And this is where the story turns on a single idea. In 1942, test pilots and engineers on both sides of the Atlantic asked a simple question. What would happen if you took this beautifully clean American airframe and mated it to the British Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same superb high-altitude engine that powered the Spitfire? The answer changed the war. With the Merlin, built under license in America by Packard, the Mustang suddenly performed brilliantly at the very altitudes where the bombers flew, running at well over 400 miles per hour, while still carrying that same light appetite for fuel. And fuel is the real secret of the Mustang, not speed, not firepower, range. Here is the plain arithmetic of the air war in 1943. The Escort fighters of the day, the Spitfire and the early Thunderbolt, could take the bombers only part way. Somewhere over Germany, the Escorts had to turn for home, and the German fighter pilots, who were nobody's fools, simply waited at that invisible line and then fell on the unprotected bombers. The disasters over targets like Schweinfurt in the autumn of 1943, where dozens of bombers and hundreds of men were lost in a single day, forced the Americans to face the truth. Daylight bombing without escort all the way to the target was not a strategy. It was a slaughter. The Merlin Mustang broke that arithmetic. Its efficient airframe and economical crews meant it could carry extra internal fuel plus droppable external tanks under the wings, fly all the way to Berlin, drop the empty tanks, fight at full performance, and fly home. A fighter with the legs of a bomber and the teeth of an interceptor. When the first Mustang groups began escorting raids deep into Germany at the start of 1944, the entire logic of the air war flipped. The German pilots could no longer wait for the escorts to leave, because the escorts never left. What followed in the first half of 1944 was one of the most decisive campaigns in the history of air power. American Fighter Command made a cold, deliberate choice. The fighters were cut loose from close escort and told to hunt. Their job was no longer just to protect the bombers. It was to destroy the German fighter force wherever it could be found, in the air, on its airfields, in its training grounds. In a sense, the bombers became the bait and the Mustangs the trap. The cost of that strategy was paid in blood on both sides. but the outcome was unambiguous. Through the great battles of that spring, the German day fighter force was bled of its most precious resource, not aircraft, which German factories kept producing in remarkable numbers, but experienced pilots who could not be replaced. By June 6, 1944, when the Allied invasion fleet appeared off Normandy, the German Air Force was effectively absent from the sky over the beaches. That absence was the Mustang's victory as much as anyone's. Now for the part of the story the legend usually skips, because the Mustang was not a perfect machine, and pretending it was does a disservice to the men who flew it. Its liquid-cooled Merlin engine depended on a radiator and coolant lines, and a single rifle-caliber bullet or shell splinter in that cooling system could bring the aircraft down minutes later. Over Germany, where Mustang pilots increasingly went down on the deck to strafe airfields, that vulnerability killed a great many of them. Ground fire, not German fighters, claimed a large share of all Mustangs lost. The air-cooled Thunderbolt, by contrast, could absorb punishment that would have destroyed a Mustang and still carry its pilot home. Pilots also had to manage the Mustang's fuel carefully, because with the rear fuselage tank full, the aircraft's handling was degraded until that tank had been burned down. And in a low-speed turning dogfight, a well-flown German fighter could still be a deadly opponent. The Mustang's edge was speed, altitude performance, and endurance, and its pilots won by fighting on those terms. Which brings us to the myth itself, the claim built into this video's title. Did the Mustang win the sky? Here's what the record actually supports. The popular version of the story, that the bombers were helpless until the Mustang single-handedly arrived and saved them, is too simple, and historians have pushed back on it for decades. The P-47 Thunderbolt flew the brutal escort battles of 1943 and continued to do enormous damage well into 1944, and by many accountings it destroyed more enemy aircraft in the European theater overall, once its ground attack work is counted. Improved drop tanks were extending the Thunderbolt's reach too. The German fighter force was also being strangled by things no single aircraft caused, above all the catastrophic collapse of its pilot training and, later, its fuel supply. So the honest verdict is this: the Mustang did not win the air war alone, but it was the indispensable instrument of the strategy that won it. It was the only fighter that combined the range, the performance, and the numbers to make deep escort routine rather than exceptional. At exactly the moment the strategy demanded it. When Hermann Goering reportedly said that the sight of Mustangs over Berlin told him the war was lost, he was mourning precisely that. Not one plane, but what that plane made possible. There is one more part of the Mustang story that deserves to be told plainly. It was flown by the Tuskegee Airmen, the African-American pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group, who escorted bombers over Europe in red-tailed Mustangs while serving a country that segregated them at home. Their record in those aircraft became one of the most powerful arguments against the prejudice they faced, and it is permanently woven into the Mustang's legend. The Mustang's career did not end in 1945. It fought again over Korea in the ground attack role, where that same vulnerable cooling system exacted a heavy price against ground fire, a final reminder that even great machines have the flaws of their design. And in a quieter kind of immortality, the Mustang became perhaps the most beloved warbird in the world, still flying at air shows more than 80 years after that 100-day sprint on a California drawing board. So what does the Mustang's story really tell us? That the war in the air was won not by the most exotic machine, but by the one that solved the actual problem. Germany built jets that were faster. Other fighters were tougher or turned tighter. The Mustang simply did the one thing that mattered most, going all the way there and all the way back, again and again, until the enemy had no pilots left to send up against it. It was the right airplane, with the right engine, at the right moment, flown by young men a very long way from home. That, and not any single number on a specification sheet, is why we remember it as the fighter that won the sky.